So then we get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for logging in today. And welcome to the second session of this PHO training for the trainees. We had an overwhelming response last week, and with more than 130, 140 people logging in, and the feedback we received was quite good. There are some suggestions being made, and we will be definitely taking them on board eventually after we assess this program after 2 to 3 months. So I request again, I think last time also we made appeal. It's good that all of you keep your videos on so that you can see the faces, and also feel free to raise a hand, ask a question. There is definitely a time slot kept at the end for question answers for the audience, but in between also, if there's a point you want to make or there's a question you want to ask while the case is being discussed, is absolutely fine. So today we basically have a very interesting topic to be discussed, that is thrombocytopenia, probably one of the most common hematological problems which we deal day in and day out. So there are two components to this. One is an approach to thrombocytopenia, which Neeta is going to do a didactic on. And the second component is going to be an interesting case presentation, which is a case-based discussion, basically, which Dr. Ravi Shankar is going to be presenting. Now, I've got a privilege to introduce the experts for today. And both of them don't need introduction to this audience, the stalwarts of pediatric hematology oncology. Dr. Mamta Manglani ma'am, who is the current chairperson of the chapter and also director of the CTC Thalassemia and Pediatric Hematology Oncology Center at Borivali. And we also have Dr. Jagdish Chandra. Sir is heading the Pediatric Hematology Oncology unit at Kalavati Saran Hospital, Delhi. And tremendous work both have done in the field of benign hematology and platelet disorders in particular. So I think as Neeta is trying to log in, she's having some trouble with her network at the moment. So we will go with the case presentation first, and I'll request Ravi to start presenting the case, and we'll pose the questions to the experts. And as I said, please feel free to make a comment, ask a question while the case is being discussed, and of course there's a dedicated time at the end also for the question answer session. So over to you, Ravi. And welcome, ma'am, Dr. Mamta ma'am, and Dr. Jagdish Chandra sir. Thank you for taking all the time to be part of this today.
Thank you, Sunil. Thank you. Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Can the screen be seen, sir?
Yes, we can see the screen. So I think you can go to the case presentation, and this I think we can do.
But you can put it into presentation mode, slide presentation mode. Yeah, that's right.
Sir, I'll thrombocytopenia introduction itself because I was supposed to present this part and the later part.
Sure. That's fine. That's fine. Whatever you have decided to do, you can please go ahead.
Today we'll be discussing approach to thrombocytopenia. Thrombocytopenia refers to the reduction in the platelet count to less than 1 lakh. Earlier, this parameter was less than 1.5 lakhs, and more than 2.5% of the normal population had a platelet count of less than 1.5 lakhs. So now this parameter has been brought down to 1 lakh. So thrombocytopenia is basically defined as a platelet count which is less than 1 lakh. What is important is a recent fall in the platelet count by 1/2 while still in the normal range, and it may herald a severe clinical problem, and it requires active follow-up. Coming to the clinical presentation of thrombocytopenia, the most common manifestation of thrombocytopenia is bleeding, though spontaneous bleeding is uncommon at platelet counts of more than 30,000. There is significant variability in the bleeding among the patients with similar platelet counts. Many asymptomatic patients are diagnosed with thrombocytopenia on a routine blood examination because most of them are asymptomatic. And many may be found to have thrombocytopenia while being evaluated for some other symptoms other than bleeding, such as anemia. what are the causes of the thrombocytopenia? Basically, the causes of thrombocytopenia can be grouped into three categories. One could be because of decreased production, which could be either congenital or an acquired basis. It could be because of the sequestration of the platelets within an enlarged spleen or other organs. And there could be an increased destruction of normally synthesized platelets on either an immune or a non-immune basis. So what are the cause of thrombocytopenia? Because of the decreased production, that will include hereditary disorders and acquired disorders. The acquired disorders are the common ones because the hereditary disorders are the very rare presentations. In the acquired disorders, the common presentations would be in aplastic anemia, myelodysplastic syndromes, marrow-infiltrative processes like neoplasias, osteopetrosis, nutritional deficiency states as in iron, folate, or vitamin B12 deficiency, and even in anorexia nervosa. Even the drugs and the radiation-induced thrombocytopenia could be there, and neonatal hypoxia or placental insufficiency could also lead to thrombocytopenia. Coming to the category of thrombocytopenia due to increased destruction, it could be because of the platelet consumption syndromes, and it could be because of the primary immune thrombocytopenias or non-immune thrombocytopenias. So among immune thrombocytopenias, we can have the conditions like acute and chronic ITP. There could be autoimmune diseases with chronic ITP as the manifestations, which could include cyclic thrombocytopenia, ALPS and its variants, SLE, Evans, APLA, and neoplasia associated immune thrombocytopenia. There could also be thrombocytopenia associated with HIV. There could be neonatal immune thrombocytopenia, which could be alloimmune or autoimmune. Drug-induced immune thrombocytopenia could be there. Post-transfusion purpurias and allergy and anaphylaxis, and post-transplant thrombocytopenias are also because of the increased destruction of the platelets. Among the non-immune causes, the thrombocytopenia of the infection is the most common, which could be because of the bacteremia, fungemia, or viral infections, or the protozoal infections. The other causes could be thrombotic microangiopathic disorder, sepsis, TTP, bone marrow transplantation associated microangiopathy, drug-induced thrombocytopenias. Platelets in contact with the foreign material can also present as non-immune thrombocytopenias. Similarly, congenital heart diseases, drug-induced, which could be because of the direct platelet effects like in risperidone. And type 2 B von Willebrand and platelet type von Willebrand factor can also present with non-immune thrombocytopenia. So how do we approach to a patient with thrombocytopenia? So first of all, we have to determine whether the patient is well or ill. So if the patient is well, then it would be because of the increased consumption or decreased synthesis. If the patient is having increased thrombocytopenia because of increased consumption, the patient will have large platelets, normal hemoglobin, and normal WBC. The causes could be immune, which could include ITP, or it could be secondary to SLE, HIV, or drug-induced. It could be maternal ITP or neonatal ITP, or non-immune causes like platelet type von Willebrand or hereditary macrothrombocytopenia could be the cause. If it is because of the decreased synthesis, the platelets will be small and congenital anomalies could be present, and there will be mean corpuscular volume increase in the mean corpuscular volume in the patients. And the conditions could be congenital or acquired. In congenital, we will see TAR, Wiskott-Eldridge, X-linked, A-megakaryocytic or Fanconi anemia, and acquired causes could be because of the medications, toxins, or radiations. Now, suppose if the patient is ill, then it could be again because of the increased consumption, decreased synthesis, or because of the sequestration of the platelets into the spleen. So if there is increased consumption, the fibrinogen levels will be low, and fibrin degradation products will be more, and there will be large platelets. It could be seen in microangiopathies like HUS and TTP. It could also be seen in DIC, necrotizing enterocolitis, respiratory disorders, thrombosis, umbilical artery catheterization, sepsis, and viral infections. In cases where there is decreased synthesis, the platelets will be small and there will be hepatosplenomegaly, as in malignancy and storage disorders. And sequestration, there will be in hemangioma or hypersplenism. So how do we evaluate a patient of thrombocytopenia? So before we evaluate, we will take a thorough history, which should include the onset, whether it is new, chronic, or relapsing, whether there is any history of recent medication or vaccination, whether any autoimmune disease or malignancy is there or not, is there any history of travel which may rule out malaria, rickettsia, or dengue, we should take the dietary history to rule out megaloblastic anemia, and we should look for the risk factors for HIV and hepatitis C. We'll do the clinical examination of the patient, in which we'll particularly look for the organomegaly, which could be there in leukemia and myelofibrosis. So that will be ruled out. We'll also look for the joint and the soft tissue bleedings, which will point towards the DIC. And we'll look for the skeletal anomalies and malformations to rule out the inherited bone marrow syndromes. So this is a flow chart which will depict the complete evaluation of the child with thrombocytopenia. So we'll look for the platelet count if it is less than 1 lakh, and if the age is more than 3 months, then we'll do the complete.
Ravi, this slide cannot be read on the screen. I think most of us cannot read.
Hello.
So we cannot read the slide. So yeah, this is better. That is not. This one is not. Yeah.
Is this better, ma'am?
Yeah.
हाँ, किसी को भी भेज सकते हैं. हाँ, attender.
Ravi, continue.
So just before Ravi continue, I request everyone if they could mute their microphones and keep the videos on. Thank you.
Partial है.
So now, since we have taken the history and the clinical examination has been done, so we'll proceed with the investigation in the patient of the thrombocytopenia. Now we have determined that the patient is having thrombocytopenia that is less than 1 lakh. So we will do the examination of the peripheral blood smear. And if we find platelet clumping, that will point towards the artifactual thrombocytopenia. And if there is true thrombocytopenia, then we'll have to see different kinds of pictures in that. If the patient is having giant platelets or WBC inclusions, we have to rule out the hereditary thrombocytopenias. Now, if the PBS will show cystocytes, then it could point towards the TTP or HUS or DIC. Then we'll further evaluate and look for the LDH, bilirubin, haptoglobulin, PTA, PTT, D-dimers, and fibrinogen. If we get blast cells or nucleated RBCs in the peripheral blood smear, then probable primary bone marrow disorder could be there, and we should further do bone marrow aspiration and biopsy. If microcytosis and RBC clumping or agglutination is seen in the PBS, then it is considered as Evans syndrome, and then we should do direct agglutination test, retic count, LDH, and bilirubin. If lymphocytosis, atypical limbs, or neutrophils or toxic granules, etc., are seen, then we should consider infection, and we should further investigate while doing ESR, CRP, chest X-ray, virology, blood cultures, etc. And if isolated thrombocytopenia is there, then we should consider ITP or drug-induced ITP or HIV, SCV, H. pylori infection, HIT or DIC. And in these cases, we should proceed based on the clinical assessment. So now coming to the case and how will we manage a case of chronic ITP?
Can I interrupt?
Sure, ma'am.
Hello. Yeah. So we'll discuss the case. I'm sorry to join late. There was some issue in the connectivity. So welcome, ma'am, and thank you to Dr. Mamta Manglani and Dr. Jagdish Chandra for kindly agreeing to be experts for this session. And we have a case, and we'll put discussion in between. So we'll discuss as the case evolves. Okay. So over to you, Ravi.
In April 2006, a 6-year-old girl presented to us.
2016.
16, yes, ma'am. April 2016, the girl presented who was 6 years at that time. She presented with bruises on the arm and the legs of 8 days duration, and there were a history of repeated episodes of epistaxis. There was one episode of fever a week prior to the presentation of bruise and epistaxis. In the past history, patient gave a history of jaundice at the age of 4 years, which was managed as viral hepatitis. She had transaminitis, which persisted for over a year, even after the hepatitis part was taken care of. She was screened for autoimmune hepatitis and Wilson's, which was negative. Since he was an adopted child, the family history is not contributory, and there was no history of infections, oral ulcers, arthritis, or that. In the general physical examination, she had pallor, petechiae. Her vitals were normal, though spleen tip was palpable. In the evaluation, she had a hemoglobin of 6.8 gram per deciliter. TLC, DLC was essentially normal, and she had a thrombocytopenia with a platelet count of 8,000. Peripheral smear consisted of normochromic normocytic picture with low platelet, and serum ferritin was essentially normal. So bone marrow was done, which suggested megakaryocytic.
Ravi, you have mentioned peripheral smear, normochromic, and low platelets, but you have not mentioned how the platelets looked, whatever you could see. Was the morphology seen? Was it granular platelets, large platelets, small platelets?
Ma'am, I didn't have this report entirely, so I couldn't comment on this.
So maybe we could make a mention that peripheral smear details not available, something like that, so that we know that you looked for it or someone has missed it that time, so we don't have it now, because that would make a difference. Why would you do a bone marrow in a patient who's otherwise fine? So from this history and examination, what was your inference?
It was clearly looking like a picture of ITP, ma'am, primary ITP.
So then why would you do a bone marrow? Is it mandatory? I mean, just for the sake of others to learn, we must address these questions.
Because this child also had a low hemoglobin level, and she also had a palpable spleen.
The palpable spleen is an indication for doing a marrow in a query ITP. What is the percentage of normal healthy children at that age having a tip palpable?
It could be palpable in most of the children.
Not most, my God, no. Up to 10% of healthy normal children at that age will have a tip palpable. So it's not unusual to have a tip palpable. So it's not very common. Sir wants to say something.
So can I ask a question, Dr. Ravi?
Yes.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you said the diagnosis looked like ITP. Like typically ITP patients won't have that degree of anemia. Like she has a 6.8 gram of hemoglobin. In fact, this is going too much against the diet that it is more important is normochromic. If it was a microcytic hypochromic anemia, one could understand that it could be a nutritional anemia. With that, the child is having ITP, I mean ITP-like picture, otherwise clinically. And with normocytic normochromic, this would be little odd to take this as the first diagnosis and forget about everything else.
I fully
Definitely.
agree with sir.
So that was,
fully agree.
So that was one of the reasons why marrow was done. And she had repeated episodes of epistaxis. So for at that point, either it is there is a diagnosis it's other than ITP, or is it just related to a blood loss? Because peripheral smear clearly did not have any evidence of nutritional anemia at that point. And ferritin was also done for that point, and ferritin also was
low. It is low.
Not high.
It's not very low, but it's low.
It's not very low, yes.
Yeah.
So this was the picture, and then continue, Ravi. So that's why a bone marrow was done, ma'am, at that time. And we did a reticulocyte count also because there were 2 cell lines being affected.
So in the bone marrow picture was suggestive of megakaryocytic thrombocytopenia, and there was normoblastic erythropoiesis. Corrected retic count was 4.1%, and the DCT was negative at that time. The ultrasound abdomen was done, which had a spleen of 12.5 centimeters. Portal veins were of normal size and flow, and LFT was normal, and viral markers were negative. So diagnosis of immune thrombocytopenia at the time, and
So ITP was considered at that point because there was no other supporting diagnosis. So at that point, there were some more investigations done, which we will just discuss towards in a few more slides. So immune thrombocytopenia was considered because platelets were megakaryocytic thrombocytopenia was there in the bone marrow, and bone marrow showed good amount of megakaryocytes, all the typical features, and there was no other reason for anemia other than probably blood loss. So this is how we usually classify ITP as primary and secondary. Secondary, if you have an underlying cause for ITP, then you call it as secondary ITP. Next slide. So peripheral smear was looked for other causes also. There was that, and obviously bone marrow did not yield any other diagnosis. So ITP, when we classified, yes, ma'am.
There are a couple of questions. What are you attributing jaundice to? What was the direct and indirect component? Dr. Preeti Mehta wants to know. And someone has asked, in ITP, it is not unusual to have raised retics in this case. I don't know whether they meant it is not unusual to have, it is not usual to have raised retics, whereas in this case, no, raised retics would be present because of bleed. If there is an active bleed, you can have reticulocytosis. That's not a big problem to explain. But I don't know, Ravi, what was bilirubin? I don't think you mentioned, because that history of transaminitis was
LFT was normal.
Normal. So there was
2
no
years back.
hyperbilirubinemia. I think 4 years ago, at 4 years age, she had some transaminitis and hepatitis. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So this is how we classified immune thrombocytopenia now as newly diagnosed, persistent, and chronic ITP. So at this point of time, when the child presented, it was a short history. So she was taken as newly diagnosed ITP and proceeded. And our presumption was that hemoglobin of 6.8 with a retic of 4% was probably only bleed related, probably in a background of a patient who is mildly iron deficient suddenly coming in with a bleed. So that was our presumption at that point. Direct Coombs test was negative. Next slide.
What would be the implications of the history 2 years ago of liver dysfunction with a hepatitis-like phenomenon? I think I'm asking Ravi, not Neeta.
Yes.
Because he's supposed to be the trainee, I suppose. Is Ravi the trainee?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
I think I address my questions to him, not to you, because you would be able to answer everything. So, Ravi, can you give some answer to this? Does it have a bearing on the present thrombocytopenia and then the normocytic normochromic anemia? Can you put all this together in a different way?
Autoimmune hepatitis presenting with ITP and autoimmune hemolytic anemias could be there. So we wanted to rule out autoimmune hepatitis, and that's where the history of jaundice was important in this case.
So what test you did to rule out autoimmune hepatitis in this child?
So all the autoimmune markers were sent, ma'am.
Anti-LKM was also sent? And biopsy, liver biopsy also was done?
No, liver biopsy was sent he would not know that history. Liver biopsy was sent at that time. Originally it was done, and the child was being followed up at another center by a gastroenterologist, and it was reported as just chronic hepatitis. No definitive diagnosis came out of it.
Okay. So now with that history of liver biopsy showing chronic hepatitis, would you like to say something about the anemia and the thrombocytopenia at present? I mean, ITP is a very simple diagnosis to make, but it is generally not preceded by some such illness in the remote past. There would be a acute viral infection or a vaccination 2 to 3 weeks prior to the onset. Yes, we can understand. But this is something which you will have to keep in mind, whether there is a chronic disease happening. So why you say this is not a chronic disease with anemia of chronic disease with thrombocytopenia due to liver dysfunction? I'm now putting the question directly to you. How would you justify?
This time when the child presented, the liver function was normal essentially. So if it would have been a chronic liver disease persisting, then the liver function should have been deranged. So we will not attribute this present episode to that particular.
So which function you would look at to say now the liver function is good, not deranged?
We'll look for the.
So you have to look at the synthetic functions of the liver, the albumin and the prothrombin time. These two, rather than looking at the enzymes and the bilirubin, because they may remain normal in a chronic liver disease intermittently. Yeah. And someone asked a very good question. What is the growth and development of this child? That again tells you that this is not seemingly a chronic disease because she's grown well despite what she went through. Probably that was an acute episode, though the liver biopsy showed some chronic changes. I'm not sure what it would have been. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important to not jump to a diagnosis and close on it in the first go. Always keep mind open. try to evaluate every aspect you gather as a clue in the history, and then try to build upon it from that clue that you have, without just diagnosing something as an impulsive thing. You may sometimes be wrong. Sometimes, most of the times, you may still be correct because it's on the face very correctly ITP like phenomena. Okay.
So,
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Continue, Ravi.
so with the history and the bone marrow picture, we diagnosed the child as a newly diagnosed ITP. Though still the anemia was a question for us, which could have been nutritional, but the PBS was not suggestive of so. So it could be because of the repeated blood loss from the epistaxis, because of which the child had anemia. And another thing was the splenomegaly. As ma'am said, 10% of the child can already have splenomegaly. So this thing is also not very much contributory at this time. So considering the ITP, the treatment given was methylprednisolone for 3 days. Oral steroid was added and it was later tapered. And hematinics was added in view of anemia.
So let us stop here. Let us stop here. As per guidelines, how does one treat an acute ITP? As per latest guidelines, this is in 2016 you have treated, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So now
Even
what are
at
the
that
new?
time,
Yeah, giving methylprednisolone and followed by oral steroids is generally not required. Okay.
We'll generally wait and watch if there is no life happening.
After methylprednisolone, 3 days, we just stop and we don't give oral steroids. We just give a course of high dose methylprednisolone, or we generally prefer to start only oral steroids. Why? Why do we do that? Can someone say, can you answer that? Why would you not really bother to give?
Because, ma'am, the life-threatening hemorrhages in children with ITP is very less, and it's a better policy to wait and watch rather than jump straight away to treatment.
No. So in this case, was treatment warranted? First of all, yes, no. What was the indication for the treatment in this case?
It was because of, the child also had a history of anemia along with the thrombocytopenia. And we wanted the...
No, see, the indications for treating an acute ITP are very clear. If there is a mucosal bleed, okay, or if the platelet count is very low, below 10,000 is what we take as, Indian cutoff, because we don't want to wait till 5,000. The platelets of ITP are sticky. They're very, very sticky, and they really give you good plug formation despite being very low. So they do not bleed profusely even if the platelets are very low. But at the same time, in our country, we cannot really monitor the child as well. Parents do not have the time, and most of them are low socioeconomic strata. They will run around. So we don't want to take a chance. So we would treat below 10,000. Now, the indication for treating in this child, therefore, was your platelet count, which was below 10,000, right? But he had no mucosal bleeds at the time you saw him.
She had history of recurrent epistaxis.
No, but at that time, she was not having a mucosal bleed, right? So that was not an indication, but otherwise mucosal bleeds would be an indication. So you treat acute ITP generally with first line treatment is?
Steroids, ma'am, corticosteroids.
What steroids? Oral, high dose, low dose?
We give you the high dose methylprednisolone for 3 days, and then.
So there is a lot of difference of opinion whether you should use high dose methylprednisolone. In the past, we used it more frequently, but today's times we have known that whether you use 4 milligram per kg of oral steroids or you use 30 milligram per kg of methylprednisolone, the outcomes are nearly similar. The time taken to increase in platelet count is very little different, and therefore it's not really necessary, but you could use either of the two. But 4 milligram per kg for 4 days is the high dose steroid regimen. And if you were to use standard doses, you give 2 milligram per kg per day, divided doses, and taper it off over 3 weeks. If there is a good response, no need to continue. Okay, so this is how you do. And what are the other options?
We can use IVIG also, ma'am, and we can use anti-D if the patient
Dose,
has.
please complete your answer. IVIG in the dose of?
Presently, it is indicated at the dose of 0.8 to 1 milligram per kg.
1 gram.
1 gram.
1 gram.
0.8 to 1 gram.
Per kg, single dose, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And anti-D?
So with this platelet count, if the child had moderate bleeding, say something like hematemesis or melena or bleeding PR, in that situation, you could have used injectable steroids or with IVIG or these two drugs. In fact, the third drug, anti-D IV, that is not where hemoglobin is too low already. So
Yes.
in a child who has had history of epistaxis, probably as Dr. Manglani was saying that the injectable methylpred in a high dose was initially not required. Probably one could have avoided.
It was not just history, sir. Patient presented with repeated epistaxis. It was not past history. The child came in with epistaxis at that point. So I think that indication to treat at that point was mucosal bleeds only.
So fine. I mean, for the trainees to understand when to start,
Yes, yes.
Sir made a right point
Yeah,
that if
that's right.
mucosal bleeds are acutely present, then yes, you must give something which will act faster, 48 to 72 hours, like IVIG or methylprednisolone. Even 4 milligram steroids orally now are recommended. So one could do that. But you would first of all say whether he was mild, moderate, severe ITP. So mild is very minor, skin bleeds, hardly any mucosal bleed. Moderate is when there is mucosal bleeds, hematemesis, epistaxis, which is significant. And severe is when they are actually in for shock, like phenomena, hypotensive, too much of bleed. So if you divide it that way, then it becomes easier for you to decide what I need to do. Minor bleeds, mild, don't even do anything if the count is about 10,000. Leave them alone, watch them, and they'll be fine. And moderate bleeds, yes, you must give oral steroids preferably. IVIG, if patient is affording, you don't want to use steroids for some reason, you could easily use IVIG even in those patients. And then in severe ones, you might even have to use platelet transfusion. So it can vary from this range of treatments. Yeah.
Can we proceed?
Yeah.
Because there is a long way now ahead. So
Yeah, but the
Ravi,
basic
yes, ma'am.
criteria is about how to approach
Yes,
the child clinically
we
rather
left
than
that ITP part.
yeah.
Acute
Yeah, that's
ITP part we left actually because the child has a very long history now.
Okay.
Ravi, please
okay.
continue.
Continue.
So,
We'll not interrupt now.
No,
After
definitely not like that, no.
After the treatment was initiated, there was a platelet response which was seen with the platelet count reaching to up to 52,000 within 3 weeks and up to 90,000 within 3 months. And hemoglobin also improved to 14.1 gram per deciliter in the month of July, and that is after 3 months.
So at this point, I wanted to ask again that whether any other evaluation is required at this point, because she came in with an anemia and we already did a bone marrow. Would you evaluate this child any further?
So hematinics caused the improvement you are saying, but we have not proven our point what was really the cause of anemia. Whether steroids improved her hemoglobin, we don't know.
It
Though
was probably
was
the
negative.
steroids, ma'am.
Yeah.
No.
Because
at that time, DCT, although was negative, it would have been probably response to steroids.
Exactly, because this is a very dramatic response. Very good hemoglobin within how much time? Within
3 months.
3 months. 3 months is not, of course, but still it is 14 grams from 6 grams. Generally, you see around 11, 12 hovering there. So it could be Coombs, even if it is Coombs negative, we would still consider that it could be an immune hemolytic anemia. And retic was not very high, but then you can have antibodies against retics too, you know. Anyway, we'll
anything
see.
else, ma'am, at this point? Practically, would you evaluate her for any other autoimmune phenomenon at this point?
In acute ITP, you would wait and watch the course. And as you have seen, for 3 months, if you're watched and the hemoglobin has gone up with hematinics, I would still continue following up the child and seeing, because Evans should remain in your in the back of your mind. Evans should always be at the back of your mind in this case.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
So Ravi, next slide.
So now we kept on following the child. In the December 2016, she had a platelet stable between 50 to 80,000, and her hemoglobin was between 13 to 14 grams per deciliter. And then she was tapered off the steroids. However, in March
So
So
you mean
off all medicines with
she received steroids for
No,
6 months?
no. This I would know the history better. So she was given steroids for a couple of weeks and then tapered off.
Okay,
So this is it just meant that she was off medicines in December with a platelet count of 50 to between 50 to 80.
Okay, okay.
And in March 2017, she again had epistaxis. However, there was no antecedent illness, and the platelet count has again fallen back to 10,000. And
So at
this
this
time,
point, yeah, so this point would be like now, so she would classify as in by now she is coming into the persistent ITP, she is going into persistent ITP towards chronicity. And we would like to discuss what are the investigations and treatment. And since then, like since that time, she has essentially till date, she has remained she has remained thrombocytopenic except for a few months in between. So
Has
this
the
is what we
anemia
are going
come
to
back?
discuss.
Has the anemia come
Yes,
back?
ma'am.
ever?
We were discussing a lot of
Achha.
history
Okay,
left. So
okay,
we'll just
okay.
break for a little bit of discussion and then go back to the case, ma'am.
Okay, okay.
So chronic ITP, next slide, Ravi. Since you have the slides, please advance. Yeah. So chronic ITP is usually self-limiting. Ma'am and Dr. Chandra sir, please interrupt in between. I have already put in some questions in between. So, but if you think anything needs more discussion, please interrupt, sir.
Sure.
So ITP is usually self-limiting, and like ma'am said, there's a very high chance that around 75-80% children are going to improve in due course of time, and only roughly 10 to 20% would continue into chronicity. Chronicity means more than one year. Next slide. And at times when the patient presents to us, we can predict the chronicity, like if it's an older child. Now this girl is just 6 years at presentation, but if it's an older patient, especially a girl, and whether there is an insidious presentation, no inciting events, and if there is very little thrombocyte, as in very less severe thrombocytopenia, it's not a dramatic presentation, it's just patient come walking in with 30-40,000 platelets, those kind of things usually continue as chronicity. So I want to ask the experts, do you counsel for chronicity at the outset? If a patient is coming in, do you tell them at the onset that this could be something which is going to last a longer period than a usual ITP?
So would you like to take or you want me to take?
I think we need to tell that most cases do recover, and rather than giving them that 10-15% chance that the child become having a chronic disease, we should just that the child will recover completely. So if they ask what happens in rest of them, then it is that the low platelet count persists and they may or may not have clinical problems. So rather than forthcoming with the diagnosis of chronic ITP that they might land up with chronic course to begin with, that I think one should avoid doing that. Unnecessary anxiety in the parents is not going to help much.
I would
What about
endorse.
infancy?
I
Yes,
would
ma'am.
endorse sir's viewpoint that I wouldn't scare the parent, but at the same
That's
time, in today's times of medical legal issues, I would very subtly put in that point that look, 80 to 85% will recover and will be fine. However, 15% may not, but I'm not going to tell you that your child will get into that or not, because we don't know, and we will see. I would put it subtly across, because today's times, maybe tomorrow if he becomes chronic, they will sue us for not telling them in the beginning that it could have happened.
Yeah.
From that point of view, we would be little careful, and also because that's the right thing that we have to tell them, that there is a very slight chance that your child may be chronic. But once they pass the 3 months period, then yes, full counseling for chronicity has to be done. Once they become persistent, they are very likely, highly likely to become chronic, and therefore one would want to start preparing them for the investigations that you need to do additionally now, and also for the course that the child may take the effect on the school absenteeism, etc. Everything will have to then be figured in.
What about infants? Like, although infants are not in the classical age for ITP, many a times we see infants who would develop thrombocytopenia along with a viral infection, and many a times they would need treatment as well. So how would you counsel infants who come in with thrombocytopenia?
So, you know, Neeta, I personally feel when it is an infant, it is unlikely to be an acquired disorder. It is very likely to be a familial disorder, except in transient viral problems, where you would just wait and watch, and as the viral disease wanes off, the thrombocytopenia should start waning off also by and large. Some patients might remain a little longer, thrombocytopenic CMV infections or EBV infections. These can go on for a little longer while, but you will have a definitive diagnosis when you do the viral markers in them. But if you have no definitive diagnosis of a viral induced thrombocytopenia in an infant, I would go for a genetic workup and see whether it is a familial disorder, because now we have availability of NGS and Sanger sequencing. So we should not delay diagnosing, because they could be conditions which require HSCT, and they would benefit highly if we do it before they become challenging, you know, with clinical problems.
Meeta, can I make a point on the counseling?
Yes, Vinay.
Sorry,
yes.
I don't have the hand raise feature because I'm hosting, so I'm sorry I couldn't do that. Okay, so I think, you know, because there are a lot of students have logged in the counseling, you know, I just wanted to, I think it's been already been said, but I just want to make a point that parental anxiety and anxiety in following those platelet counts very frequently, sometimes every day, is one of the common things which we see. And also one of the common things which we see is that, you know, change of doctors, because they feel that the first doctor hasn't been able to correct my platelet count. So I think it's very important to, you know, when we counsel this, to counsel that, including what was said, is that, you know, no treatment changes the natural course of the disease. Whatever you treat them with, nothing's going to change the natural course of the disease. So and also to, you know, to counsel about patient as such and not the platelets. I think that's very important, because what we see often in practice, that even if you're, for example, giving them IVIG, you know, is a transient response and the platelet count drops again, and they, you know, they say, oh, we spent lakhs of rupees and the you know, the disease is still the same. So I think for the younger colleagues and for the students, I think that's important, that natural history is not going to be changed with any of the treatments. It is a transient treatment, is going to help to improve the platelets transitory, you know, on a short-term basis. But there's every likelihood that the platelet is going to drop again after that.
Yeah, agreed, Sunil. That's very important point. And for all of us, we should know, don't keep chasing the platelet counts ourselves also. I know of even practitioners who keep asking them to do every third day platelet count. No need. If the patient is going to have a dip in platelet count, he's going to develop epistaxis or mouth bleeds or gum bleeds and run to you. So let him come with that, if at all, and then you do the platelet count. Don't do it very frequently. I wouldn't even advise my ITP patient who's chronic and stable at, say, 20, 30,000 to do a platelet count unless I've called him for a follow-up after 2 months. So he should not do it in between.
Mm-hmm. And this question was also this was basically for those patients whom we know in our minds that they are going to become chronic. So like an adolescent girl who is walking in with platelets of 40,000, 2 questions. One, would you counsel them at the outset? And second, would you investigate for underlying SLE and other investigations for autoimmune, the secondary causes at that point, as in not wait for it to become chronic?
Let Sir respond.
I think at a say when the disease becomes chronic ITP in a child who is, in a girl particularly who is about 12 years or so, this is certainly an indication for looking at things like SLE. And these investigations are not very expensive, and one can take advantage of the investigations. If this turns out to be SLE, then the management direction is different. You have to assess the several body systems which can be affected by the lupus and take action appropriately. So those investigations, and maybe for infections, if they have not been done earlier, those needs to be done. and maybe some people would like to do investigations for apply at that stage. And I have seen people looking at the thyroid functions. Actually, the thyroid functions test being done for in cases with chronic ITP. In fact, some texts write also. Now here it's not the hypofunction of the thyroid which will matter. It's basically the antibody which is similar or which cross reacts with the platelets also.
Yes.
So either we do the antibodies there rather than these things. So I think workup for SLE like conditions in a child, particularly a girl with chronic ITP, is definitely required. That's what my
So the question was,
yeah, so Neeta, I know
not
what
wait for
at onset, yes, I'm coming
yes,
to it.
not
I think,
waiting for it to become chronic.
yeah.
Yes.
So I wouldn't investigate at the onset. I am against that because there are adolescent girls who have acute ITP also. 20 to 30% of adults also have acute ITP. So I would wait till they at least go to a persistent level and they do not respond. Then yes, we should start doing all the workup, including doing the HCV testing. HIV I would do upfront, especially if there's a high risk history, because I have seen, being in HIV as a specialty, many patients who have had ITP like thrombocytopenia with HIV. So that you would do if there is a history, high risk in the parents, and you're suspecting a perinatal mild HIV happening, and then they come at 10 years with ITP as a first presentation, I would do. But HCV, for example, I would wait. There's no harm in waiting because there's no other symptom signs which prompt me to do. ANA and anti-dsDNAs I would do after 3 months, not at the outset. Gamma globulin levels I would do it after 3 months. So I think this is again clinical practice variable from person to person, but as per textbooks also, as per literature also, there is no indication at the onset of ITP according to me.
No, at the onset, not at the onset, when the disease is becoming chronic at that
Yeah,
stage.
yeah. No, sir,
When
you
disease
said at
becomes
when it is,
chronic,
but
definitely,
Neeta's
sir.
question was at the onset. So
No,
I
not at
specified, yeah.
in the stage of
Like
acute ITP.
we would occasionally we get patients who have been investigated even by the pediatrician and like adolescent girls who've been evaluated. So there are, as in textbook teaching wise or guideline wise, there is no indication to evaluate. But one odd child may be SLE with the presenting feature of thrombocytopenia. So basically we need to be keeping a very, very close watch for those children as whether they are evolving into lupus or other rheumatological conditions. That has to be at the back of our minds.
So I'll make one more point, Neeta, before we go to the next point, is that if there is any indication by way of clinical findings, history, clinical examination findings, or investigations which suggest to me this is not a typical ITP, then I would think differently. Then I wouldn't think the same course as I just mentioned. Then maybe, yes, you would be prompted to do more tests at the very onset. For example, anemia in this child. Therefore, you did the antiglobulin test. You wouldn't do in a normal case of ITP who's come acutely, right? So it depends on other features also. So it would be not, it will be very individual, but in general, acute ITP, typical presentation, no need to do any further investigations.
Definitely. Can we proceed? Ravi, next. So then there are some patients who present with recurrent ITP. Like it's not like thrombocytopenia is persisting. Thrombocytopenia came, went off, another 6 months later, again an episode. So one odd children in that group also would actually warrant evaluation after a point of time. Some of them may have underlying reasons for having recurrent episodes of thrombocytopenia. You can't just leave every episode as an acute or a newly diagnosed thrombocytopenia. Next slide, Ravi. So just before we go to the rest of the case, we'll just see how is chronic ITP investigated and how are we supposed to treat them. So the pathogenesis is basically immune mechanisms. I think all of us, there is a lot of literature on it. But these are the 3 points which we are going to be focusing on while we are managing. So there are some B lymphocytes which are producing autoantibodies. So a lot of treatment is directed towards that. There are these dysregulated T lymphocytes which are telling the B to produce abnormal, as in to proliferate, a clone of B lymphocytes proliferate. So T cells are again one of the main cells which are to be targeted in this. And then there are a group of patients who would have reduced production of platelets as well. So a lot of new agents are coming to increase the platelet production as well. Although it is a condition with peripheral destruction, there is impaired thrombopoiesis also, especially up to 1/3 of adults will have this. Next slide. So, and 50% of even your chronic ITPs will go into remission. So majority of patients, essentially the point to be driven home is that majority of patients, even in the chronic ITP, so 20% will go into chronicity. And even in those 20%, as time goes, more and more patients will improve. So like Sunil said, usually they go to multiple doctors and finally the last doctor they end up with, they'll be happy because by then anyway platelets had to improve, and it's basically the natural history, but the credit will come to the last doctor who is treating. So this is these are some registry data which shows that majority of up to 50% usually improve anyway within 4 to 5 years of time. Next slide. Next slide, Ravi. And who will bleed? As in only 10%, less than 10% would eventually bleed. And like ma'am said, there is a classification for mild, moderate, and severe. And here the severity of classification would be grade 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is another classification for bleeding severity. And here again, the severe ones or the significant ones would be grade 3 and grade 4 bleeds. The grade 3 being all the major mucosal bleeds, and grade 4 would be the severe bleeds, which will include hematemesis, renal bleeds, as well as life-threatening bleeds like intracranial bleeds. So we are basically focused only on those. So out of these 10% who would significantly bleed, among these, the significant bleeds we are attributing only as these grade 3 and grade 4 bleeds, and only those bleeds are the ones which need to be treated. Next slide. So we will counsel parents accordingly. So all these bruises which come up, or if there is a viral infection, some drop in platelets, some petechiae will come up, we wouldn't treat any of these patients. So only just out of every 100 ITPs, eventually the ones which will be chronic symptomatic ITPs, which would have mucosal bleeds, would probably be 1 or 2. So only those patients are treated. Next slide. I think we'll quickly advance the slides. Yeah, so ITP investigations, we already mentioned in the discussions. Bone marrow would be done at some point, and if there is a chronic ITP, definitely once a bone marrow has to be done to look for reduced production, myelodysplastic syndromes, etc. need to be looked at. Rheumatological diseases are already mentioned, thyroid profile, and at times it could be even reflected in there are patients who have juvenile autoimmune thyroiditis who can come with hypo or hyperthyroidism also. So even if we don't test the antibody, sometimes it reflects in the thyroid profile itself. Then viral markers. There was some data on H. pylori testing, and some people do test for CMV, but they're not routinely recommended. A boy with thrombocytopenia needs to be looked at. Viscoeldred should be looked up. Again, EC from a peripheral smear. And of course, like ma'am said, immune deficiencies, especially small babies presenting with thrombocytopenia, or elderly patients. Elderly, as in by elderly, I mean adolescent patients who are presenting with boy or girl presenting with thrombocytopenia. CVID is again one of the other possibilities. So these are the investigations that you would do. And so I would, next slide, Ravi. So I would ask the experts, is there anything? So practically, what all do you advise? Among this list of investigations, is there anything, what all the ones which you practically advise? And is there anything we have missed out? Ma'am, I think you're muted.
So I think, yeah, I think we discussed that there is the workup for rheumatological diseases and thyroid and infections. That is fine, even viscous eldritch in boys. And in fact, that could have been seen even earlier if the child was on follow-up for chronic ITP. Immune deficiency, certainly one needs to look at the immunoglobulin levels. But I would H. pylori probably is not required. This is in adults. There are some studies which have shown that H. pylori association is there, and in pediatric age group, I'm not too sure that this is definitely something which is recommended. Even in adolescents, also, it's not that recommended. And of course, unless there are suggestions, maybe cryptic clues could be there in the peripheral blood, or they might come up sometime. So, and then you can look at the B12 levels and folate levels, again, that also one cannot make a routine that every child with chronic ITP should undergo such investigations. If there is a doubt that you might have missed out the genetic disorders, these panels have become available. One can consider doing that. But by and large, the rheumatological and the infections and the immune deficiencies, these are the ones which would be the usual investigations required.
So Neeta, because you have asked what more investigations, one thing which I didn't find listed here is myelodysplastic syndrome. So fish, if you have any, even subtle changes in the megakaryocytes, because sometimes when we just look at the marrow and see megakaryocytes, we are so thrilled that we just stop at that and label it as ITP and get out of it. But I have seen cases where I have found that my juniors have said, Madam, megakaryocytes are adequate and we need not worry. And I say, no, show me the marrow. And I look at it, find some micromegakaryocytes, some monolobated megakaryocytes, some non-platelet budding megakaryocytes, So when you see such findings, you must think of myelodysplasia and even inherited myelodysplastic syndromes, which now we are seeing more and more because of tests being available. I would definitely look at the marrow, give a second look before discarding it as a ITP, and then do a fish if required and further cytogenetics for MDS. So do a second marrow to do the MDS workup. That is one thing which I felt should be looked at. B12 levels should be done in everybody who comes with any of the cytopenias and has bicytopenia especially with anemia. He was normocytic. This girl was normocytic. If there was a slight macro, I don't know the exact MCV. Suppose the MCV was 88, we would still call it normocytic as per the Western standards. But as per Indian standards, for me, 88 is a little high MCV. We see in our children 75 to 80 as a normal MCV. So I would still rule out B12 deficiency. I have had a patient in the past who was labeled as MDS and turned out B12 deficiency and did very well once B12 was supplemented. So there have been such anecdotal cases where you miss and you might end up diagnosing wrongly. I think besides that, you have put everything. H. pylori, I also do not do as a routine because it's not recommended in children. Even by ASH guidelines, they have now refuted it. So.
Ma'am, just a question. Most of these kids would have seen many people, and it's very usual to see a lot of these kids on long-term steroids. So they may have been on, a flicker of steroid or even sometimes significant dose of steroids for a long time. Now, if as a part of our evaluation in a chronic ITP or even sometimes late persistent ITPs, we'll do a bone marrow. What's the safe time after prednisone stoppage you would recommend to do a bone marrow examination?
So are you trying to say in context of leukemia which has been missed and steroids have been given and therefore the patient has been in remission and now you want it to come up again?
Yeah, in the both. I mean, that's also one of the things which is always in the back of the mind, especially the kids who have been treated elsewhere. So not seen by good centers. Yeah.
According to my experience, I can tell you, because I don't think anywhere in books they have mentioned a period of time, because these mistakes are not supposed to happen. So they won't mention it in books. But according to my experience, I've seen a window of 2 months at least. After you stop steroids, within 2 months, they come with a relapse of leukemia. So maybe you should wait for a good 1.5 to 2 months and allow them to come up with some symptoms and signs. Then only repeat a marrow. Otherwise, you will not get meaningful information, and you may tell the patient that you're fine, no, nothing to worry. This is my experience. I don't know if sir wants to add something.
To give a time, maybe 8 weeks, 12 weeks time, and we don't have. This might be just 1 or 2 cases experience. Exactly. It's not a vast experience. So, but certainly one needs to give time. It's not immediately when one can't jump to doing a bone marrow again. But in a child who has had a chronic course, that looks unlikely. Like acute ITP being treated as with corticosteroids, and there it's more likely that it was leukemia which was not picked up and the child was treated. But in a child with a course of probably less likely to be leukemia, which is treated as with corticosteroids.
Yeah, yeah. Because the response to steroids will be dramatic in an ALL who has been misdiagnosed as acute ITP, and they'll go into actually almost a complete remission. And then they come back with a relapse which has all the features, anemia, thrombocytopenia again. So you will not really miss at that time, in fact. But obviously, the mistake that has been made by the first treating physician is a big price the patient has to pay for that, because now it's a relapsed leukemia you're treating, and the protocols will be aggressive and the outcomes will be poorer. So from that point of view, it's very important that if you're not sure, better do a marrow upfront before giving steroids. I still teach my juniors that please give steroids after doing a marrow, even if you are 100% confident this is ITP. Marrow is like a blood collection for a hematologist and therefore does not matter, and you can convince the patient.
Yeah. So that it's, although guidelines say otherwise, like I think it's still in our country, it's still safer to do a bone marrow.
But Nita,
And,
if I correct you,
steroids.
the guidelines or American guidelines say don't do marrow. British Committee of Standards in Hematology even today says do marrow before giving steroids. And we have followed Britishers quite for centuries, so we might as well continue following them for this aspect.
Like you said, there is a difference between what is being done in the West, what type of culture that they have. Here, most of the patients, once they have shown in our hospitals, they will go to peripheral parts where people will not, understand why a marrow has not been done. So if a child is there, say with acute ITP and bleeding, like say hematemesis is there, would tend to give the IVIG rather than jumping on to give corticosteroids. If one has to add corticosteroids, it's better to do a bone marrow examination. In fact, that we have been doing all through. In fact, we do more marrows than what the Western literature recommends.
Definitely. I think Dr. Swati wants to say something. Sunil? I think we'll come back to you, Dr. Swati. Once they allow you, make you unmute.
She's unmuted.
Yes.
Okay, a quick question now for patients with chronic ITP. Let's say you've given them steroids and you're going to do immunoglobulins on these patients once they get into chronicity. So that is one point that we have to consider, that you've given them steroids and then you're trying to do immunoglobulins. You may not get correct reports.
You are right, Swati. Exactly.
So therefore you have to allow at least, like I would say again, another 2 months before you can do immunoglobulin levels or even lymphocyte subset analysis. So sometimes I think that it's easier to do an immunoglobulin upfront. If you have these atypical situations, and doing at least an immunoglobulin upfront so that you know that you have a vitiated immunoglobulin level.
No, but Swati, the incidence of common variable immunodeficiency is so low that it is not justifiable to do immunoglobulins in every patient upfront.
No.
Because 80% of your patients are going to go scot-free. So I would suggest that wait for a period of 8 to 12 weeks after steroids have been stopped, because steroids you give for 2 to 3 weeks as soon as the patient comes in acute ITP. And generally we do not repeat them for not very low counts. So if they are not very low counts and they persist later to be 20-30, they're not going to be on steroids, but they can be investigated then. I would suggest that. I wouldn't.
That is possible. Yeah. That is correct.
And but the reduction of immunoglobulin also, ma'am.
Yeah.
It won't be very low, as in it will be mildly on the lower side of normal, but to get very low levels, less than 2 standard deviation, is a little unusual for only steroid treated patients.
But sometimes you are not able to decide in a given case.
But the same would hold true for IVIG given, because then it will give erroneously higher to do very soon after giving IVIG.
Yes.
So I think whatever treatment has been received, we must wait for at least 8 weeks to lapse after the treatment to do these tests. And there is no such big hurry, in these patients. There is no real hurry to do it.
Okay. So next slide, Ravi. So, so going on, so management, I think, yes, definitely to treat mucosal bleeding and get to a platelets to a reasonably safe level which prevents mucosal bleed would probably be the only goal of treatment. Next slide. And next slide. Just you can just quickly advance slides now. So how would you educate patients for parental education? A lot of things which has been already discussed. So I'll quickly just go through it. So we won't chase platelet counts, and a lot of activity restriction would probably be needed in schools. So that has to be told to them. Antiplatelet medications for during fever episodes has to be told them. Oral hygiene, chances of gum bleeds would increase if there is poor oral hygiene. So that constipation that can be taken care of. Menstrual bleeding may be problematic in older girls. And report symptoms and come in for evaluation probably 3 monthly if they are having stable counts. If probably less than that, then definitely. And annually investigations like SLE and all, even if you evaluate at one point, probably you repeat it after a year or so. So then these things evolve with time. So based on the present, if it's a patient who is presented with chronicity, maybe some of these investigations we mentioned may be repeated later also. Anything else, ma'am?
Yeah, so Nita, I also tell them to take soft diet and use soft toothbrush so that it reduces the chances of mouth bleeds, you know. That helps. As we say for our hemophiliacs, we can also advise any bleeder to do that. That is additional thing that we would do.
Sir?
Actually, I would agree, but we don't have to chase the platelet counts, and we have to treat according to what the bleeding manifestations are. As you have rightly pointed out regarding the treatment of menstrual bleeding, in fact, the pediatric texts do not write much about how to manage such cases.
Yes.
And what we have been doing over the last 3-4 years, not only with these patients with ITP, some patients with the aplastic anemia also, when they have severe thrombocytopenia persisting, it's problem. And in consultation with our gynecologist, what we do is that we continue these OCPs, and then the gynecologist, after doing ultrasound, they decide that, say, when you allow the bleeding to occur. In that situation, like say, they usually, for a chronic case, they would allow 3 to 4 times in a year. That is sufficient. And for shedding of the mucosa, at that time, you give some drugs which can temporarily at least raise the platelet count and keep the child in hospital for a couple of days. So this is a very typical thing. In fact, since now pediatricians are treating children up to 18 years of age, this is something which I have seen over the last 10-12 years only. It was not being seen by us earlier. So that's a very important thing to realize.
Sir,
and
actually,
thing is that the modification in the lifestyle, they are required, particularly when the games, children are playing some game to be avoided. And we usually tend to give drugs which maybe use simple drugs like Dapsone. These are the drugs which people do use, and there is now enough literature of its response in pediatric patients. But the drugs like IVIG, NTD, and injectable corticosteroids, they should be minimally used whenever there are the significant bleedings.
So I think we had a question on menstrual bleeding later. So most of it is taken care of now only. And many children, that is again one constant worry in patients, in adolescent girls who present with thrombocytopenia.
So
next
Nita,
slide, Ravi.
just
Yes,
one point I'll make about menstrual bleeding. Sir said they use continuously OCP, only break 3-4 times in a year. Our gynecologist has been giving monthly breaks, just like a normal menstrual cycle. And it has worked quite well. What they explained is when you use very low dose estrogen or no estrogen, only progesterone, the type of withdrawal bleed that happens has a very thin endometrial lining which is shed. And therefore, they do not bleed significantly even if the platelet counts are not very high. So we don't even treat them during those episodes of menstruation, and they do quite well if they are around 15,000, 20,000 platelet counts. If we do not give that, then they bleed heavily and then they need intervention. So we do that. And we've been doing it for years, sir, now. Almost 20, 25, 30 years I've been having my adolescent patients following up, and we have been doing it and it has worked well.
Yeah.
So if we are
progesterone only. Yes, sir.
every month So
Yeah, like 21 days cycle, then
bleeding
7 days gap.
Yeah,
That's what
yeah.
we've been also following.
contraceptive. How does
Pardon?
that help in that case?
Pardon
No,
me, sir?
because psychologically they feel they are normal, sir. Otherwise, they start wondering they are not menstruating, and there is no
Okay.
harm in doing it. So why not?
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other option is depot-progesterone, and
Yes.
so that we have used in von Willebrand patients, and just
Yes.
that in that is again a group of patients where menorrhagia is very bad.
Very
So
significant.
depot-progesterone helps. So it kind of breaks a cycle for like 6 months or so. It's very convenient. It's easy to build up hemoglobin and all during this 6 months of gap. So that's another agent which helps. And like ma'am said, the bleeding, breakthrough bleeding is very minimal. So it's usually, it can be taken care of, especially for ITP patients. Can we proceed? Ravi? So there is again no consensus as such for like the consensus we had on acute ITP. There is not much of consensus on the chronic ITP front. But these are the agents. You have frontline, first line agents, second line agents, and third line agents. The group of drugs which we were managing as second line has been pushed to third line now, ever since we have rituximab and thrombopoietin receptor agonist in the picture. So that has come up. Whereas the old group of agents like azathioprine, cyclosporin, etc. have now come as third line. So what is needed is first line to raise platelets immediately. What are the agents available if a patient is coming in with a very bad bleed? And second, what would you give as a maintenance treatment to keep them at a very, keep a safe level of platelets? This is the time to response. I think you can, it's easily accessible. Next slide. And you would treat only grade 3, grade 4 bleeds. You will not treat skin bleeds. Again, to reiterate that point. And when you give first line agents to just increase the bleed, that would be a small pulsed treatment only. And that is with the understanding that this is going to work only for the next couple of weeks. It is just to build up platelets so that the bleeding stops immediately. Next. And sometimes people continue on steroids in chronic ITP. So that is again something which is not recommended. But if at all you're forced to give a low dose of steroids, then that should be in the morning, alternate day dosing, or maybe once in 3 days. And that too as the lowest amount of lowest amount of steroids, which can keep a platelet around 10, 15, 20,000 would be advisable. And morning, usually before 9 a.m. so that it coincides with their diurnal variation of steroids. So complications or side effects of steroid use will be minimal. Next slide. Please stop, and we can stop and discuss, ma'am. If
So I just wanted to add one point that Pulse DEXA works pretty well in many patients. I've used it quite often in patients who do not respond to even rituximab, and they respond dramatically sometimes to Pulse DEXA, which is either 25 milligrams per meter square or 40 milligrams per meter square for 4 days every month for 6 months. So that is a good treatment if you do not have any other treatment working.
yes. And the second line therapy currently is these 3 agents. This is the recommendation. And again, a decision would be made on a lot of factors based on the age of the patient, the affordability for us. I think most of the decisions boil down to affordability, ease of administration, how long can the patient, like how frequently can the patient come to a hospital, what is the possibility of getting into a long-term remission. Next slide. Yeah, so we'll just briefly discuss before we see what happened to the patient. So rituximab is one agent which has been helpful in patients with chronic ITP, especially if they are symptomatic. So this is one of the second. Yes, sir. Okay. So this is one of the agents. It works through. It basically causes B lymphopenia. So antibody production, autoantibody production comes down significantly. Next slide. And there are how many patients respond is again a question. It's probably half of the patients whom we administer rituximab respond. Maybe only about 20-25% will get a very good response over the years, but at least 40-50% would have some kind of platelet response, which we can go on for the next few years. There is no optimal pediatric dose. So here I would want to ask the experts. Next slide, Ravi. That this point. So basically, is there a difference in the pediatric dosing that you have used in ITP? And second is, what are the routine investigations that you would do in a rituximab patient for pre-treatment for rituximab? And have you encountered adverse effects? We all are worried about rituximab related adverse events. So in practice, what all have you encountered? Sir, Dr. Chandra.
We have in fact used it very sparingly. Initially, we were using that 4 into 375, but since that couple of papers which came up with a smaller dose, we have started using that. And we have not seen adverse events too much. I don't have, in fact, very large experience. Maybe some 7-8 patients we might have used, but I don't remember having encountered a very serious adverse event in them. The only problem with the use of rituximab is that you wait for some time, a couple of months, and then the response starts coming slightly more, and then you don't know whether it is a spontaneous remission or it is the drug, unless you are doing 2 arms and you compare both the arms. So, but by and large, it does probably seem to have effect, and some patients do improve. And most of these patients would have undergone an investigation for excluding the infections. That is what we do. I am not aware if any specific pre-treatment evaluation is required for this.
So rituximab we have used in low dose 100 milligram per meter square as well as 375 milligrams per meter square, both protocols. Again, not a huge large series of patients, as sir said, because we are always skeptical of using rituximab. Yes, vaccinations are affected post rituximab, so you cannot vaccinate them for 6 months to 1 year, and sometimes up to 2 years their B cells may remain low. So you have to be on the watch for their infections and treat them promptly if they get any problems. Pre-treatment workup, even we don't do anything specific, and that's what I agree with sir.
I think hepatitis B, C, etc. Any chronic
Liver,
as part
liver,
of chronic
yeah.
we would do. Viral, there is data to show that there can be flare up of viral infections.
Yeah, I said mostly the investigation would have been done when we land up.
Yeah, so because it's chronic ITP, you would have already done HBV, HCV. That's why no additional work.
Rheumatologists look at tuberculosis very strongly. Like they do a chest X-ray and all prior to starting rituximab.
I wouldn't agree because it's a B cell.
Yeah, it
it's
should
a
not
B cell
actually.
drug. I don't think I would. Anti-CD20, what would it do to tuberculosis?
Should not, but yeah,
it's not a B cell drug.
And of course consent for all sorts of side effects. We do both infusion related as well as viral reactivation as well as CNS and other latent infections being flaring up. All that has to be taken, especially PML has to be taken. So like ma'am says and sir said, not many adverse events have, as in reality, thankfully we haven't encountered many, but 1 odd cases can definitely be there. So better to be safe. Next slide, Ravi. And then there is this new group of drugs which were not new now because it has been licensed since 2008 now. So almost 10-12 years. So these are this group of agents which actually increases platelet production. So when you increase platelet production, so you're kind of tilting the balance more in the favor of more platelets. So even if there are antibodies, there still would be more platelets in the system. So your platelet counts are better. So there are 2 drugs basically in this group, romiplostim and eltrombopag. Both are available in our country now. Next slide. So I think quickly, since we are like a little short of time, we'll quickly go through this. So this was approved in both, it started from trial started in the US and in the European Union. It has been approved in pediatric age group, more than 1 year of age. And not just for ITP, I think it's been now used for aplastic anemia. It's used for hepatitis C related thrombocytopenias. A lot of other indications as well has come up for these agents. Next slide. Ravi? Yeah. So that again, coming to the practical aspect. So when we use this drug, it's frightfully expensive. So that is the biggest challenge in giving this drug. So here it is recommended at a dose of 25 mg once a day for younger children less than 5 years, and 6 years onwards at 50 mg daily, which is probably the adult dose. And adult dose is dose dependent. You can go up also to up to 75 mg. I think even more than that is approved now. So there is no liquid formulation in our country now. It's taken as a tablet only, and a lot of dietary restrictions are there. So again, another question to the experts, whether when we are using it practically, have you found it to be useful? One, and second is, have you found any major the way in this dietary interactions? What are the practical suggestions that you have from your side?
So dietary restrictions we advise to the patient, and patient generally would follow to some extent. So there is no major issues. But yes, we have found it very useful, not only in ITP, but in aplastic anemia also we have found very good responses. Yeah, we do worry about liver toxicity all the time. We worry about thrombosis. So we keep a watch on these aspects. And if there's anything that the patient complains of, we work them up for those things, and we stop and reduce the dose if required. As the platelet counts go up, you're supposed to titrate and reduce the doses and taper off. So once you the problem with L-Thrombopag that I have seen is once you take it away, the thrombocytopenia tends to come back. So that's an issue. But well, that's the way it is. Romiplostim, we have not had an opportunity to use in ITP, but we have used in post bone marrow transplant thrombocytopenia, and we are finding good results. It's an injectable weekly drug, so it's a little cumbersome for patients, but otherwise it is also a very useful drug. It's less expensive. That's the beauty of it. This is very expensive, L-Thrombopag. This is my little experience that I have. Sir can elaborate further.
Yeah, I have no opportunity to use these drugs in ITP patients before till 2019. And only in the beginning of this year we could procure from the hospital. Then only we could give to some patients, and so it could be just about 2 months experience. And after the lockdown, everything has gone haywire. So I have not followed up those, but I have used this in aplastic anemia patients in January, and they seem to be doing slightly better than the others. But as the theory says, the L-Thrombopag in ITP is useful, and it has. But the only problem is that responses do not come very fast. Come about 2 to 3 weeks later, and then when you stop them, there have been instances in Western literature, all the drug was being provided by the insurance company, and then there were some issues. So temporarily stoppage, and then it goes down. The platelet count come down in about 3-4 weeks time. So as long as you keep giving that way, it would be very expensive to use. Romiplostim is slightly less expensive, but similar thing is there with that also, being injectable, and then you have this problem that response takes time, and then it's not that once response is there, it would last even after a stoppage of the drug.
There is a
very limited experience with these two compounds.
There's a publication which came in, I think IJP 2019. Dr. Deepak Bansal is one of the authors, in which they have done a cost analysis of all the agents. And I think the L-Thrombopag would come to around 1.5 to 1.6 lakhs per month, whereas Romiplostim would come to around 2/3 of that. So this is it's usually for most patients it's out of bounds unless they have some reimbursement. So next slide, please.
So Dr. Sunil is also writing here, like once that the platelet count is very robust, then maybe Dr. Sunil, why don't you speak yourself? What he writes is that when the platelet count is robust, you could reduce the dose. That would cut down the cost.
So there are guidelines actually by which you have to reduce the dose. You have to actually wait till the counts are, if the counts remain about 2 lakhs, then you can reduce the dose by 12.5 milligram per week. And then if the counts become more than 4 lakhs and they remain persistently above 4 lakhs for 2 weeks, then you can even, the minimum lowest dose that you were using can be
temporarily stop it.
So you can temporarily stop it. But if it again drops below 1.5 lakh, the guideline says you have to restart the L-Thrombopag. So it is a, seesaw that you have to play with the drug.
But have we seen that kind of platelets? Because I would have used it in close to 10-12 ITP patients and 3-4 aplastics. I've never seen that kind of response with this drug.
No, it generally hovers around 1 to 1.5 lakhs. And therefore you keep continuing. No, aplastic I have seen. I have seen 2 patients of mine, aplastic, who are doing very well. Of course, this was along with IST.
Yeah,
because
I don't know what is working. Yeah.
Because this was presented in ASH this year, and I think the eltrombopag arm did not have any benefit. Although it was in earlier publications, there was a benefit of earlier platelet recovery. I think this time when they published the longer data, there was not much of improvement.
I think
So
Judith
that's-
Marsh had published her data that in adults she found very good results with eltrombopag along with the IST. But
maybe pathogenesis wise, it might be
Yeah.
different, ma'am, because adults 1/3 they say are thrombopoiesis reflex are there. So maybe
Yeah.
they would respond better.
Right.
So this is again skipping these slides. So efficacy is again all the data has been made on platelet. Their sustained response of just 30,000. So that is how all these petty papers have been published. 30,000, 50,000 are the cutoffs they're looking at. Nobody would really looked at 1 lakh platelets or sustained remissions after stopping was not seen at all.
Nita,
So,
may I make a point? I think there's a lot of interest in this topic. I can see from the chat. So I think, when we talk about clinical trials, so there, the objectives are different and the endpoints are different. And there's a difference when you practice in a clinical practice. So in a clinical practice, we would never want, it's not desired and it's not required a plate count to be more than 1.5 to 4. So in clinical practice, what also these, PET-1 and PET-2 trials suggested was that 30 to 50,000 is a reasonable platelet count to maintain. So whatever minimum dose of eltrombopag you can give them to sustain that should be absolutely fine. So the dose adjustments and whatever was suggested was in a clinical trial setting, which maybe probably is not relevant in a clinical setting.
But even
May I
clinical
say-
setting, we would want only 30,000. No, why would we want 1 lakh platelets when we are
In
treating
clinical
patients
setting,
for-
it was 30 to 50,000 is what we require. In the clinical trial setting, it was separate. They wanted to see how
No,
many
even in
percentage
the
patients.
trials also, like can we come to the next slide, Ravi? I think the trials also they have looked at endpoints of 50,000 only. No,
That's
just the
right.
other slide before this. Yeah. So the primary endpoint was basically just 50,000, and the secondary endpoint is whether other drugs could be stopped, like if they were on steroids or azathioprine, etc., whether they could be stopped. So these were the trial and the endpoints that they looked up in the study also. So I think we'll just go to the next slide, ma'am. So Dr. Swati will come back in a minute, ma'am. So it's basically, since there is reduced bleeding, definitely quality of life would improve, and that was shown in these trials as well. Next slide. Next slide. So I think we'll come back to the case. There are side effects, like ma'am said, hepatic impairment, as in transaminitis has to be looked for. Myelofibrosis used to be one of the earlier thing, but then later on the follow-up, they did not find much myelofibrosis. Cataracts are there, and then there are ongoing studies for long-term safety when that is happening right now. Next slide. And there is romiplostim. I think there are some couple of questions in the chat box also, like the dosing. I haven't used it yet. So I have a couple of patients lined up, but not used it yet. So if somebody's been using it, maybe they can answer what is the starting dose and how do we go up on the dosing based on the platelet count.
So we are using for post-transplant thrombocytopenia in two or three patients. We are giving 5 mics per kg per week. And then we plan to come down on it once the patient improves to come down to 2.5 mics per kg and then omit it.
Sub-Q dosing?
Subcute, weekly.
Sub-Q dose. So can they take it at home if a parent is
No,
taught?
we call them. We have not yet started home therapy because we also want to check on their CBCs. These are post-transplant patients. I don't know if Sunil has any experience of using it.
We have used in both post-transplant thrombocytopenia, and most of the post-transplant thrombocytopenias are, more of not immune. They're morely sometimes bone marrow failures, and they have got other cell lines also down.
Okay.
And also in ITP settings. My experience has been in ITP settings is probably works a little better than in post-transplant setting because the pathogens probably are different. In post-transplant setting, when we're using it for a global pancytopenia, we use 5 to 10 mics, which is a higher dose as compared to when you use it, ITP setting or isolated thrombocytopenia. Isolated thrombocytopenia and ITP setting especially, 2 to 3 micrograms. In adults, for example, they start with 1 microgram and can go up, but the median dose which shows a good response is around 3 to 4 in adults, and same in children has been a higher dose to start with. So 3 to 4 micrograms to begin with, and then you can titrate and go up, and maximum dose is 10 mics per kg. But as I said, in post-transplant setting, we have used a little higher dose, 5 to 10, because they're more likely to be a a bone marrow failure. So it's cheaper. It's significantly cheaper than Eltrombopag. I think the tooth, even it comes significantly less. So 15 to 20% of the cost what will be otherwise with Eltrombopag.
Okay.
Next slide. I think we'll skip these couple of slides. Ravi? Next. So I think it's comparable in terms of response as well as side effects are a little better for omeclostim. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah. So these are the traditional third line drugs, which we have been using more commonly before all these agents come, and even now we are using many of these drugs for patients who do not respond to the primary first line therapy. Next slide. None of them are curative. It's basically a trade-off between what side effects can you accept versus what is the child bleeding because of thrombocytopenia. So these are agents. Azathioprine used to be very, very popular earlier, and this is the dose. And you try it, all of these agents. I think the blanket thing is you try it for 2 to 3 months, and if there is no response, you stop, because adverse effects can be really bad. So azathioprine, cyclosporin, all of them acts through the lymphocyte and it disrupts the lymphocyte function, and doses etc. are standard. Next slide. Another agent is danazol that is used. Again, lot of danazol is used even by rheumatologists also, and it is again select population of patients only. And Dapsone is again another drug which I think probably everybody is using these days. So probably, and the dose is around 1 to 3 milligram per kilogram per day, and G6PD screening is done. And even while on Dapsone, patients can have methemoglobinemia, slight drop in hemoglobin, even if their G6PD levels are normal. So that has to be informed, and that has to be followed up in your subsequent CBCs. We need to look at hemoglobin also when we are on, when the patient is on Dapsone. Next slide. And then MMF and Vinca I'm just skipping, and MMF also is used in a lot of patients. And that again has, it is reasonably better tolerable compared to the other agents. Next slide. So what happened to our patient? Ravi, please continue.
In 2016-17, the ANA came to be 1+, dsDNA was still negative, C3, C4 was normal, APLA, IgG, IgM was negative, DCT was negative, and thyroid function was normal this time. A level was a bit low, and IgG was on a higher normal side, and IgM and IgE were normal. The child was given prednisolone at 2 milligram per kg per day. There was poor platelet response with the platelet ranging between 22 to 25,000. And the platelet dropped once the steroid was tapered. So at that time, Dapsone was added. In June 2017, the platelet remained stable at around 20,000 on Dapsone at 75 milligram once a day, and alternate day 2.5 milligram prednisolone. In 2017-18, the HB remained between 8 to 10 grams per deciliter. Platelet was between 5,000 to 25,000. Child presented with bleed in the skin, gums, and there were epistaxis. At times, she had palpable purpura also. At this time, the ANA was repeatedly 1+, and the DCT also came to be 1+. Rumab opinion was taken, which is, they did not contribute much. Ophthalmological evaluation was also done since the child was on steroid also, and that was also NAD. The child has been on and off steroids since the diagnosis of the chronic ITP, and the Dapsone was continued. So at this time, CVID or ALPS was suspected, and we looked for the liver disease. DCT was positive, chronic ITP was there, and splenomegaly was there. So these two probable diagnoses were suspected. The ENA panel, LAC, anticardiolipin antibodies were negative, TB and NK subsets were normal, and double negative T cells were normal.
So basically, we have a chronic ITP patient. She is symptomatic. She gets grade 3 bleeds in between, there is a poor quality of life, and there are episodes of there is anemia as well ongoing. Probably by now it is autoimmune only, because DCT also has started coming positive. So what are the treatment options? Whether we should be treating her only with pulse steroids like dexamethasone ma'am suggested, or should we put her on a second line agent, or should we look for another option which is cheaper but at the cost of having side effects?
So Neeta,
Next.
I have a question to you.
Yes,
Are
ma'am.
you convinced this is simple plain chronic ITP, primary ITP?
Now by now
not.
it is syndrome.
Obviously not. So the possibilities are Evans syndrome, monogenic lupus, which is an inherited disorder. And I think an NGS in such a patient would be worthwhile doing.
Yes. So NGS was also done. I've not put this. NGS was
Achha.
done. VUS and 2-3 funny genes came up, which was not at all related to any of the immune deficiency. So we are stuck with that also.
Okay. And secondly, there was a question about splenectomy. I mean, Sunil has answered, but I want to differ a little from him because he's so young and I'm so much older. So I want to differ. So in my whole career in ITP, I would have seen thousands of ITPs. I have done only once a splenectomy for a patient who had a life-threatening impending intracranial bleed, and there was no time to salvage him, and therefore we went ahead and clamped the pedicle and splenectomized him. He was 2-year-old. I don't know whether he was really ITP also now, because this is 25 years ago. But splenectomy can be completely avoided in today's times with so many availabilities on your armamentarium. And in a child, splenectomy can cost you much more than just allowing him to be a chronic ITP. So I would really refrain from splenectomy totally in any patient unless there is absolutely no option. I mean, I'm stuck, I'm totally pushed against the wall, maybe very occasionally, but not.
I agree with you, ma'am. I think I gave a scientific answer. It gives the highest long-term remission, but it's something we should avoid in current day, especially in children. So that's, I think you put it nicely.
Yes, sir. Sir is still on, no? It's logged on, no?
Yeah, he's.
Okay, I think I'm muted.
We need to conclude, Neeta. Yeah, wind up.
Wind up, right, please. So what happened to this child, Ravi? So we put her on. So her father works in the government, so he did have access to Eltron-Bupac. By then, he said he can get it. So we tried it for 2 months, but no response. So that was also stopped. So no significant response happened. Of course, the dose we gave was only 25 mg daily. She was already 7-8 years by then. But so probably that is why. But it did not work and it was stopped. Next slide. So coming to the last bit of it, Ravi, please continue.
So the progress in the 2018-19, in November 2018, she had a fever of 1 day duration, and which was associated with epistaxis, and she vomited with swallowed blood. She had severe pallor and had features of CCF at presentation, and her DCT was 4+ at this time, and platelet count was 940.
So now then the disease is evolving again. By now DCT is 4+, and she is actively hemolyzing with hemoglobin, I think 1 or 2 gram percentage. She came in with CCF. So now again the question, what are the options available to us now? So probably we need something which is quicker, and we need to get the platelets up fast. So that's what she went on to receive methylpred and IVIG together, because she came in such a bad situation, and her parents were counseled for rituximab at that point. Next slide. And subsequently, after IVIG and methylpred, she did have stable hemoglobin, and platelets were around 30,000-40,000, and worked up for rituximab. She received rituximab. Next slide. And these were the platelets after that. So since around Jan 2019, her platelets are above 50,000, and a few records have been above 1 lakh as well. DCT is continuing to be positive, and hemoglobin is stable above 9. So now recently what happened is, next slide. So in March, she had her first period, and after which her hemoglobin has dropped again, and she's back on hematinics. But this was one question we wanted to ask, but I think that has been answered. So now she is going, even post rituximab, she is having platelets of late, last 2 to 3 weeks, she is having platelets around 80,000, and hemoglobin is around 6 now. So the question again to the experts are: one, she's now going towards refractoriness, so she's probably failing rituximab therapy as well. Would you consider a repeat course, or at this point would you consider splenectomy?
So first, I don't have a diagnosis, of course. Management, yes, of course, would be an important aspect, but I also want a diagnosis. And I would suggest even doing the whole exome, you know, to come to know whether there is some mutation which is not a common mutation and therefore not picked up by doing an NGS. I would go for that. Repeat course of rituximab, if she has responded in the past, would be a worthwhile trial. And then if she really doesn't respond, even after splenectomy, I don't know how much she's going to benefit and long-term complication that she'll have. So I would be still wary and try and manage her with medical management.
Yes. Sir?
Yeah, I would also agree with on this, that splenectomy should be the last resort, and you could maybe another course of rituximab and maybe low dose corticosteroid if that helps. And one can think of using vincristine type of therapy, because that gives you answer in 4 weeks time. It doesn't require that long. So and other than that, I mean, it's a hit and trial. Nothing will in a such refractory case, nothing really is like this is the treatment which is required. So one could think of, like, if the low platelets and anemia is becoming too much of a problem, then since the age is now 12 years or so, one can consider splenectomy. But then, as ma'am said, that there are issues with the splenectomy and post-splenectomy sepsis and prophylaxis, etc. That all needs to be looked.
And if you are considering ALPS as one of your differentials, then again, splenectomy can be very dangerous in such patients. So you'll have to...
CVID.
Yeah,
That
CVID.
also splenectomy can be very bad.
Yeah, so that's why you will have to be very careful when considering this option in her. I would still feel try and manage her medically and get her diagnosis so you can decide whether she deserves an HSCT. You know?
How has been the growth of this?
She's been growing well, sir, but obviously there are, since she has received multiple pulse steroids in between, she has bony aches and pains, and that part is there. But otherwise, height-wise is okay. Weight, she's on the higher side, but not like Cushingoid or anything, but
Okay.
low.
Just a small point. It might be useful, because some literature has come up on immune problems in children with celiac disease. We all know that diabetes could be there, hypothyroidism could be there. For PHO, when Sunil asked me to do that AIHA, I looked up. Even AIHA is described with celiac disease, and ITP kind of picture is also described. So, one can think of doing that test, and that's a simple test, easily available. And one can look at if it is celiac, even if there's no growth failure. We know a lot of celiacs don't have growth failure. So that is something one can look at.
Since,
And
since she was IgA,
not to say simple, but it would be entirely in different line.
easier. Since she was IgA deficient,
I think that's a very good thought.
Earlier.
Sorry. Oh, you
Since she was
already
IgA deficiency, I think around 30% patients can have, as in celiac deficiency. Celiac disease is more common in
it was
IgA.
there.
So it was ruled out earlier.
Okay.
So I think that is it, Sunil. I think there are some more slides on splenectomy. We will skip that. Splenectomy is like the only treatment which modifies natural history, but it's absolutely not done nowadays. And next slide, Ravi. Over the years, there is, next slide. There is lesser and lesser patients who are receiving splenectomy as a modality of treatment. You may consider it in a patient who is living very far away, as in you cannot come to the hospital. But then at the same time, in the same breath, you know how difficult it would be to manage the sepsis in such a scenario also. So it's almost a question. So even in US also, the temporal trends have started coming down for splenectomy. Not just from infection point of view, long-term morbidity in terms of thrombosis, etc., is also higher in splenectomy in patients with thalassemia. Next slide. I think these are the guidelines. ASH guidelines do mention splenectomy as a treatment modality in patients who have completed 12 months of disease with a very low platelet count. Next slide. That's
Time
good.
for IAP
Last.
PHO guidelines.
Yes, definitely, sir.
I think I must now leave the meeting because we have been waiting to do it, but somehow not managed to do. We should do it, sir. We'll do it. Because of the lockdown, our whole thing went out of gear.
I know.
Yeah.
So thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. I think it's been a good discussion. And so these are the options for her. And I hope, let's hope she gets into a sustained remission.
Yeah, but do the whole exome, I think. I mean, whole genome.
Definitely.
Whole
Yes.
genome. That
Yes.
will help us to conclude a diagnosis. And let us know when you get the diagnosis.
We will update in a later stage.
Interesting
Thank
case.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nita. This case, at least for us, even we after treating so many ITPs and AIHs, this would be a learning experience for
Absolutely.
Madam would agree on that.
Yes.
So thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ravi, for presenting so well.
Ravi, bye-bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
He's in the COVID duty, ma'am. So I don't get to see him.
Oh, okay.
He's on night duty these days.
Achha, okay. Take care and stay safe, Ravi.
Thank you very
So
much, ma'am.
thank you very much, all of you. Thank you, Nita, for presenting and moderating the case. Thank you, Ravi, for preparing it, and huge thanks to the experts for their all comments and the wisdom. And thank you for all logging in. So it's all, as I said, it's all meeting belongs to all of us. So let's volunteer to present. Let's volunteer to share our cases and experiences. And we'll see you again next Thursday at the same time, 4 o'clock. Please give your feedback
Dr.
because that will help us
Manas is
improve.
presenting. Next week,
Manas.
Dr. Manas is presenting. Yeah. So we can
Yeah, we'll
send it out.
send out. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Sure.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Sunil.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.